jump into it. And we'll start off with just a little bit of a really basic introduction as to what we're going to be talking about. And I tend to go through, I guess, 6 things. So we start off with a little bit of an outline of life in New Zealand. Most of you will either be at the stage of thinking about doing it, or maybe you've made up your mind and now you're looking for the how to do it. Depending on where you are in that process, understanding what life is like in New Zealand is actually quite hard to do from a distance. There's One thing is, researching New Zealand via social media or maybe looking at websites and trying to get a picture of what life will be like here. And that's, natural, and that's what people likely want to do, but it's quite different to actually living here. So my advice to anyone who's making the move is just to think a little bit more about kind of comparing your current life to how life might work. So the routines that you'll have. You will make the move. Most of you will need a job offer. You'll be working. You'll be getting up in the morning. You'll be going to work. You'll be coming home at night. You'll be paying your bills. And that's the routine that we all need to settle into. You'll just be doing that in a different country. So as you research life in New Zealand, just bear that in mind, that traveling here and seeing the kind of tourism brochure version is quite different to actually setting up a new life here. And I tend to find most people go through a little bit of a curve. The initial part of the move is exciting and fun, and it's all new and different. And then you go through a bit of a low patch where you settle in, and you'll miss home. You'll miss the familiar things you're used to. There'll be a lot of, possibly thinking, why did you do this? And then eventually you come out the other side of that, settled into the country and sort of understanding how it all works. So my overview of New Zealand is really brief. It's just to give you, I guess, a little bit of a picture of the economy, employment opportunities, how certain things work here. Most of you will do a lot more of your own research, and talking to me in the one-to-one consultation can give you some additional advice as well. We'll then do a really brief visa overview. So from looking from the top down, how does the whole system work? Just a basic kind of picture, which helps set the scene for then the next 2 sessions or sections, which are really more detailed and in-depth reviews of the different categories that we have. The big focus for my seminars is on residence. We do talk about the temporary visa part of the equation as well, because it is part of the process. But our goal for our clients is for them to be able to secure the right to live here permanently. So we don't cover things like student visas or maybe visitor visas in great detail, because often those are different pathways to achieving the main goal. For most of you, we'll be looking at things like the skilled migrant category, which is really focused on employment and then securing the right to live here forever. And that will bring us to those next 2 sections, which is all about family and business visas and skilled migrant categories. So we'll spend a bit of time there. We'll finally wrap up with the 5th part, which is what actually makes a successful migration work. So what does that look like? And it's not all about just the visa. The visa is obviously really important, and that's an important part of the process. But we also look at things like, we also look at things like relocation, what it means to settle into the country, how all those things fit together to make up a successful migration. And then finally, we'll talk a little bit about the consultation process for those who might be interested in booking in. Okay, so in terms of a quick overview of New Zealand, and I guess before we get to that, just a very brief backstory for myself. So I've been doing this work for 23 years. And that's 2 decades of assisting people to make the move has taught me a few things along the way, particularly around how the whole process works and how to kind of keep it very realistic and make sure that people have a very realistic view of what it means to move. So a common theme with my seminars and my presentations, and even when I'm dealing with clients directly, is telling them what they need to know, not necessarily what they want to hear. So the migration process is really complex. It can be challenging. It can be financially challenging as well. So it's giving people a very realistic perspective on what the move entails, which I think means they are then generally better prepared for the process. All right. So, in terms of a brief overview of New Zealand, so starting off with employment, and for many of you, that will be a really important part of the process. And some of you might have even started doing that homework already. So, you might be looking at jobs or what the job market looks like. And I think that's a good idea. That's a good idea from two perspectives. For many of you, getting a job will be the key to securing residence. So, you need to know what opportunities exist, what's available, and where those jobs are available. It's also useful because it gives you a guide as to what your cost of living might look like, and that's the fourth point on that slide. So, for example, where the jobs are, what kind of work you could secure, but then also how much that might pay, and then that's going to give you an idea as to what your expenses might be, what your cost of living might look like. So unemployment here does remain low compared to the rest of the world, but in New Zealand terms, we would suggest that our unemployment market is a little bit higher than we would like. So we have a bit of pressure on the labour market right now. And in different spaces, though. So, for example, people who work in healthcare, education, engineering, IT, and some of the more specialty roles, there's definitely still strong demand. For other industries, that demand is a bit softer. And that's all a consequence of the sort of post-COVID bubble that a lot of countries are experiencing, with inflation being relatively high as well. So a lot of moves here to push that inflation number down. So it's slowly sort of returning to where it should be, which is great. But that's going to take a little bit of time. We will, I assume, and I hope, get to a point where we see much stronger employment opportunities over maybe the next 6 to 12 months. And we're already starting to see employers open up again to potentially hiring those from offshore as the demand for skills increases. So it's really important to keep an eye on the employment market. And I guess one big challenge that I would also talk about, and I talk about with clients as they make the move, is that finding a job is a difficult process. It's a challenge. It's necessary. Obviously, it's a big part of making the move, not just for the visa, but also just to live and settle here. And it often involves actually being here. That's a big advantage. If you can make your way into the country and be in the country looking for work, that will set you ahead of many of your competitors, and your competitors in that job search are often other migrants. So if you're in the country, you're able to meet employers and talk to them directly, that makes a really big difference. Education and healthcare, something that a lot of people consider when they're making the move, because often people are making the move, maybe not necessarily for themselves, but for their families, for their children. And so education and healthcare in New Zealand are both taxpayer funded. So that means if you make the move and your children want to go to school, they are enrolled in public school for free, and that is covered by your taxation. There are some costs to put children in school, obviously books and uniforms and things like that, but the actual tuition costs are covered by the state. We do have private education as well, which you can pay for if you wish, but the vast majority of New Zealand children actually go to public school for free. Healthcare is the same, so we have a private healthcare system. You pay insurance and you can be covered there, or you can rely on the public system. There are some costs involved in that in terms of doctor's visits and so forth, but in general, your full medical treatment is covered by the state, and that's all funded by the taxes that you pay. And this applies to people who are residents and citizens, of course, but also to people who might be on a temporary visa initially. And that's really important because for some of you, you will actually be here on temporary visas for a period of time before you transition to residence. So if you have a work visa here, for example, and you're working your way towards residence, which we'll talk about a bit later, you would still be covered before education and healthcare. And so that helps that transition, and it's reasonably generous. I guess the sort of simple approach by our government is if you're paying taxes, then you have an equal right to secure those two things. And they're pretty basic things, but they're pretty important things. Third point on the New Zealand overview would be the property. And for many of you, buying a home will be something you'll want to pursue at some stage. Often happens a little bit later in the move. So once you've arrived, you've settled in, kind of figured out where you want to live as well, which will be based on where you're working. Once you understand what the particular suburbs in your city or location might look like, and then you'll take some time to actually purchase a property. You can only purchase property once you're a resident visa holder, and ordinarily you need to have been living here for 1 year first as a resident. There are some exemptions to that, and you can get permission to purchase property a little bit sooner. But if you're here on a temporary work visa, for example, you won't be in a position to buy a house at that point. And most people wouldn't want to do that anyway, because when you purchase a property, you want to have that resident security as well. Property prices have cooled a little bit, again, due largely to inflation and economic pressures. So there's a pretty good market at the moment for property at a slightly lower price, but still reasonably high compared to other parts of the world. I guess one thing and it's something that people make the mistake of quite often, is before they move, they look at property prices and they're really comparing those prices to their current incomes. And of course, there's an exchange rate difference there and an earning difference as well. So once you've established what your earning level might be for your particular role and the work that you do, that will then give you the ability to look at what you can afford in terms of property. So do that maths based on what you can earn in New Zealand rather than what you're earning at the moment. And then finally, cost of living. So again, like most countries who have exited the sort of COVID bubble with a lot of money being pumped into the economy to keep everything afloat, that cost of living has come back full circle, and things are, we would consider them reasonably expensive. For some things, certain things are still very moderate or even cheap. Certain items have gone up in price. That's all cooling off again as inflation eases. So, we are seeing the kind of tail end of a recession, hopefully, and things or green shoots popping up now and then. I guess the big thing to consider is all relative. And if you're coming from somewhere, say, for example, like South Africa, New Zealand's economy and our employment situation and our cost of living would actually be fantastic compared to what you might be experiencing there. So it's all very relative. We tend to look at our economy, obviously, from our own perspective and see challenges. Other people coming from other countries see opportunities. And for those who are skilled, who are employable, and who approach this process in the right way, it's absolutely a very viable prospect. Given unemployment still sits around the 5.5% mark, that's very low compared to other places. So when you're doing your homework and doing your research, just bear all of that in mind, that it's sort of comparing apples with apples, not apples with oranges. When we do our one-to-one consultations, what we tend to do is also talk quite a bit about each person's employment situation, what the market for their skill set might look like, what they should be aiming for in terms of salary as well. But the whole idea trying to be to give you a pretty good picture as to how this whole thing might pan out. And again, I guess it all forms part of that process, that the relocation isn't just about the visa. We are here to talk about visas primarily, but understanding the move also means understanding all those other things. So what you can earn, what you might end up paying for things, what your sort of life will look like once you have made the move. And if you get a good handle on that, then the visa process itself becomes kind of, less important. All right, so in terms of a bit of an overview of the visa system, and if we were just looking at it from a very basic perspective, we essentially have two types of visa here in New Zealand. We have a temporary visa, which is for a fixed period of time, and normally enables someone to do something fairly specific. So you might be coming here to visit, to have a bit of a holiday, to see family. You might be coming here to study for a period of time, and we do have a lot of international students that come into the country, and then some stay on and some leave. Or you might be coming here to work. And work visas are a big part of our temporary visa system. Uh, Temporary visas, however, are for a fixed period of time. So they have an end date. And then at the end of that visa, you have to look at either a new visa or leaving the country. On the other side, we have residence visas, which are permanent, or there is a process to go through which enables them to be permanent. And that's really what people are looking for. So they're ultimately looking to stay here indefinitely, to be able to live, work, and study here freely and do what they like. And that's essentially what a resident visa does. So once you have secured residence through whichever pathway that you can choose, and we have essentially three streams. There's investor or business applicants, there are those who are skilled, and there are those coming in under family. Once you've secured your residence, then you are kind of free to do what you wish. One thing that's a little bit unique with New Zealand compared to other countries is that our residence process essentially gets you or grants you the ability to stay here forever. And we start with an initial, for most applicants, a 2-year commitment window. So we grant you a residence, you commit to the country for a couple of years, and that's a pretty easy process to do. And then we give you another visa, which allows you to come and go freely forever. And that's quite unique because most countries don't offer that. They offer maybe a 5-year visa that you keep renewing, or 2 years or 3 years. New Zealand says, stick it out for a couple of years, work here, live here, show us that you actually want to be a resident here, and then we'll give you another visa that lets you travel in and out indefinitely forever. And that is what we call permanent residence. And so for a lot of people, that's a really a positive thing because they have the right then to maybe go overseas for a year or two, work abroad, and then come back again. So it's sort of securing the right to live here indefinitely. So that's basic outline of how it works, but we're now going to dive a little bit into the actual residence categories that we have. And I'm going to start with the ones that and just do a very sort of brief summary of each of the ones that we have that are not part of the skilled migrant stream, because the skilled migrant stream is where the bulk of people attending these seminars will end up. That's the category they're looking at. But our other categories tend to focus on things like family applications or business or investment. So in terms of the parent category, we'll start off with that. And a lot of the applicants I talk to want to eventually bring their parents into the country. We do have 2 parent pathways. One is essentially a ballot-driven system, which allows applicants or parents to apply based on their children being resident here for a period of time, 3 years. And they go into a lottery or a pool and then are randomly selected from that pool and then invited to apply. It's a bit of a tricky one because it does require the children in New Zealand who are sponsoring the parents to earn a certain income, which is moderate to high income. And because it's a ballot-driven system, there's no certainty in terms of when a parent will be invited to apply. So you might file your expression of interest and put mum and dad into the ballot, and it might be 2 years, a year, 6 months, 2 weeks before they're selected. Immigration holds regular draws every 3 months, but the selections are random, not chronological. And so there's a bit of, I guess, pushback on that, and we may see that system change at some point. I'm more in favour of a chronological selection. We then have the parent retirement category, which is also for parents, but for those who have some money to invest, $1 million that they can invest into the country for 4 years, with an additional $500,000 in settlement funds, and earning an annual income of $60,000 equivalent New Zealand dollars. If parents are in that particular situation, they can apply directly. They do not have to wait for the children to have been here for 3 years, and it takes a lot quicker, to process. So there's no ballot. You literally just lodge your application, and then you can make the move. So if your children migrate, or if you are the children migrating and you secure your residence, then as soon as you're settled here, and that would ordinarily be pretty much straight away once your residence is granted, and mum and dad or mum or dad qualify under parent retirement, they can apply immediately and probably processed inside of about 6 months. And then the money is invested for a period of 4 years. Then we have partnership category. So for those who are in a relationship with a New Zealand citizen or resident who wish to make the move, they can qualify under that pathway as well. It's normally a sort of multiple step process for partners because they start out maybe on a temporary visa, and often it's a visitor visa to bring them into the country to live with a partner. Then that moves on to a work visa once they've lived together for 2 or 3 months. There's no set time on how long you have to have lived with your partner to get that work visa. We normally recommend at least 2 or 3 months. And then once you've lived together for a year, you can make the final step to residence. So normally, because of the timing of everything, it takes sort of maybe 3 at minimum, sometimes 4 visa applications to get through that process. But it is all based on the partnership. So there's no job required, no points assessment, nothing like that. Finally, we have the 2 investor and business streams. The investor category, actually, that section on the slide needs slight updating. We have a reasonably new investor stream called the active investor category, which is essentially for those who can invest either $5 or $10 million into the country for a period of time, 3 years or 5 years, and that secures them residence directly. And then we now have a new business investor visa for those who wish to purchase a business. So the investor category, you're investing into direct investments, managed funds, that sort of thing. The business investor visa, which was actually announced yesterday, is for those looking to purchase and work in an active business in New Zealand between 1 and 2 million New Zealand dollars. So that's a really quick look at the other categories we have that are not part of the skilled migrant program. And the skilled migrant program is really where I want to spend, the next 15, maybe 20 minutes, because that's where the bulk of our migration comes through. All right, so the skilled migrant program can be basically broken down into 2 streams. There are actually 5 different visa categories within what we call the SMC, or the skilled migrant category. And those 5 streams are kind of divided again into 2 paths. So there's a system that involves having points and a points-based test, and then there's a system that doesn't involve points at all for different occupations. So we'll start off with the no points pathway, and we'll break that down into its different parts, and then we'll have a look at the points-based system as well. Most applicants will probably end up qualifying under the point system, and it's much broader in terms of who can apply under that pathway. But for those who are in somewhat specialist occupations, the no points pathway is something they can look at as well. So essentially, the way that the no points pathway, and that's not actually its name, but that's what we'll call it for today, is the way that works is it's all based on the occupation that you do and the job that you secure in New Zealand. And there are 2 or 3 categories that rely on very specific occupations. That's the care workforce and truck drivers. The truck driver category is actually closing. So we're not really going to talk about those. We're going to talk about the green list. And some of you may have heard of that before. It's often referred to in terms of our New Zealand immigration system. It's very popular. And it's essentially a list of occupations that the government has determined to be in demand. So when the government sets up these policies, they look at occupations that we generally always need, where there's a kind of ongoing chronic shortage of that particular person in New Zealand. And so we want to carve out or create very specific visa options for them. And that's all based on this green list. So the green list is split into 2 parts. There's a Tier 1 category and a Tier 2 category. And the main difference between those 2 things is that the Tier 1 pathway enables applicants to apply straight to residence, and the Tier 2 pathway allows people to work to residence. And it's a bit like saying, well, of the list of occupations that we have on this green list, which are in demand, some are in higher demand than others. So those occupations that tend to be more specialised, more technical in nature, occupy Tier 1 of the list. And if you have a job in one of those occupations in New Zealand, with an accredited New Zealand employer. So that's an employer that's sought approval to go through this process. Then you can apply directly for residence. You don't have to work here for any period of time. Having the job offer is sufficient, and then you apply for residence, it's approved, you travel to New Zealand, and you're free to do what you want. You still need to take up that job, obviously, but you're not beholden to that job, so you don't have to stay in that occupation for any period of time. Uh, and there's one other sort of really important point, and it's a bit of a catch that gets people out or catches people out, and that is that all the occupations on the green list come with some requirements. And those requirements could be something like being registered in New Zealand to work in that occupation. It could be having a certain income level in that occupation, having a particular qualification, or having a certain amount of experience. So, give you a really quick example. If you're coming into New Zealand as a teacher, and teachers, most teaching occupations are on tier 1 of the green list, you need to have New Zealand registration. That's the key thing. And you need that anyway in order to work here and teach here. Similarly, if you were, say, coming in as a IT professional, IT professionals don't need a qualification, they don't need experience, they don't need registration, but they need to earn a certain income. So where a lot of people get this part of the process wrong, unfortunately, is they look at the green list and they say, well, I'm in that occupation, so I do that work. And then they get a job offer in New Zealand that's based on having that skill and working in that role. And they will then apply for residence based on the green list. The problem is they might not have looked at the actual requirements for that job, and they might not meet those requirements. So they'll spend the money to lodge the application only for it to be declined. So it's really important, if you have that job offer, if you've secured that job offer here in that occupation on that list, that you meet those very specific requirements. Some of the requirements are quite straightforward. Some of them are a little bit more complex to understand. But establishing those and making sure you tick those boxes is crucial, because applying for residence is not a cheap exercise, and you want to do that right the first time around. You don't want to be trying that more than once. So, having the job offer on the green list, tier 1, and meeting the green list requirements will give you a straight to residence pathway. Now, for some applicants, we still might have to do a work visa anyway, because their residence application might actually take a while to process. And if that's the case, and the employer is desperate to bring you across, the work visa would be the answer to that problem. So even though we have a straight to residence pathway, work visas are sometimes needed to fill the gap between securing the job and then being able to actually make the move. Not common though, because the straight to residence applications are picked up reasonably quickly. Immigration tends to process them quite fast. We typically see outcomes for those applications within sort of 4 to 6 weeks, if the application is well prepared. And again, that's another, I guess, trap for some migrants, is that you have to make sure your application is lodged correctly from the start. You want to make sure you've got all the paperwork ready, everything organised and correct. So that means the processing time is much quicker. If you file an application that's incomplete, you run the risk of immigration declining it potentially, because they only give you a limited amount of time to fix any mistakes. Or it's delayed. It just takes a lot longer to process because you have to go backwards and forwards. So a really big part of what we do when we start with a client, and we start before the job is secured, we start sort of well ahead of all of that, is doing all the preparation. So making sure we have all the paperwork, all the documents, everything we need, so that the only missing ingredient is, in theory, the job offer. And while we don't do recruitment, I'm not a recruiter, I do assist clients in terms of how and where to look for work. We assist with things like CV preparation and so forth. And that's all part of that initial consultation discussion. We'll talk about how you might best approach that job search problem, because it is a bit of a challenge, but there's certainly ways you can manage that. So that's tier 1. Tier 2 is slightly different. So tier 2 is saying these are jobs that are in demand, but not quite as high a demand as the other jobs. or maybe a slightly lower set of skills. So what we're essentially saying is we want these people to stay and to secure residence, but we're going to ask them to work here for a period of time, 2 years, before we get to that residence point. The benefit, however, is that the only requirement for residence is that you have worked here for 2 years in that role and you meet the green list requirements. So a good example of that might be someone like a vehicle mechanic or motor mechanic, or a heavy diesel mechanic who needs to have a particular level of qualification, and be working in New Zealand with an accredited employer for 2 years. But there's no points test. So you work the 2 years, as long as you've done that and you meet those qualification requirements, you can apply for residence at the end of that 2 years. Again, processed reasonably quickly. So the work to residence process does involve securing a work visa as part of that, in order to come here and do the 2 years of work. So just understanding how that green list is split up, that there are requirements for each job. So having the job is important, but you also need to meet those specific requirements as well, is really, really key. Before we move on to the point system, and just, I guess, to kind of backtrack a little bit, but to clarify that for residents, there are some other requirements and minimum requirements, and those apply to both the green list or the no points pathway, but also to the points-based system as well. And so number one, we have an age cutoff. You must be no older than 56 at the time you apply for residence. So 55 years, 11 months, 3 weeks and 6 days is fine. The next day you wouldn't qualify. And so if you're having to come here and work for a period of time, whether it be as a tier 2 work to residence on the green list or under the point system, you need to factor that in. So the age isn't considered when the work visa is granted, it's considered when the residence is lodged. There's actually no age cap for a work visa. So if you're 52, and you need to work here for 3 years, you'd need to be thinking very carefully about the timing of that, because you need to make sure you're under 56 years of age when you lodge residence. When you do lodge residence, though, time stops. So if you're, 55, 11 months, 3 weeks and 6 days on the day you apply, your age freezes on that day. So you turn 56 the next day, but immigration will carry on processing your application as if you were the day before. So it's really just a line in the sand. We also have English requirements for applicants. For most applicants, unless you're coming out of a very small number of countries where we exempt you, English tests are required. There are 5 different tests though, and if you're comfortable with English and you speak it and write it well, then the English test's generally not an issue. But again, these are things we do up front to make sure that that is all covered and addressed before we lodge the applications. You need to be of good health for residents and also for temporary work visas as well. That's all done through an immigration approved medical. We're not looking for athletes or triathletes. We're looking for people who are of good health, but general health conditions we can deal with. Significant health conditions will pose an issue, and that's something we need to work on. But they'd have to be fairly significant for them to rule you out of getting a visa. And then finally, good character. So you need to make sure you are of good character. If you have criminal convictions, that doesn't necessarily mean you can't get a visa, but it could change the way the process works in terms of needing maybe a character waiver, or something like that in order to pass the character test. So when we do our initial consultation with people, we do ask a lot more questions. We ask you to fill in a more complicated form because we need to know all of this stuff. And often it's more a case of just making sure we declare everything correctly. The irony is that immigration will decline an application absolutely outright if you don't declare something. If you declare something and you deal with it and front up to it and provide good explanation, often you can get through that process unscathed. So not declaring it is worse than declaring it. So that's some basics for all residence categories. We'll now jump into the other skilled migrant system, which is the points-based system. And this is where probably the majority of skilled migrants end up falling into. So the green list is a very sort of narrow or smaller list of all the occupations you can think of. So it's only for very select occupations. The skilled migrant category point system is for all other skilled occupations. So if you're not on the green list, for example, and what happens often on social media, particularly, is people get a hold of these lists, and that becomes kind of the only thing people think about. And so often they think, well, if I'm not on the list, I don't qualify. But actually, in reality, if you're skilled, then there's generally a way for you to make this work. And this is where the point system comes in. So the point system accounts for everyone who's skilled but not on the green list. And when we refer to skilled, we refer to two things. So skilled can be defined either by how much you earn. So if you earn a certain level of income in New Zealand, you're skilled no matter what you do. Or if you, depending on what you do, we have a list of occupations called ANZSCO, ANZSCO, and you can have a look at that online. And that ranks all jobs based on a skill level from 1 to 5. So for the skilled migrant category, we accept all occupations at skill level 1, 2, or 3, 1 being the highest, and then falling down to 3. We don't accept level 4 or 5 unless you're earning a certain salary, and then the salary trumps that skill level. And skill level in ANZSCO 1 to 3, so a 1 might be an engineer, a skill level 3 might be a tradesperson or a secretary or a personal assistant, and then the 2s are kind of middle management. So there's a whole range of jobs that fall in that skill classification. So you'd be very surprised at who does and maybe doesn't qualify under the point system. So again, you have to have a job offer with an accredited employer, be under 56 when you apply for residence, speak English and be able to prove it, be of good health and good character. However, with this point system, we have to look at how the points are structured. And just bearing in mind, this is under review, so we will potentially see a little bit more flexibility with these points, but it's not going to change dramatically. The one thing I expect we will see during this review is that more trade occupations will qualify, and there'll be some, I guess, ability for those who maybe don't have a degree, aren't registered in New Zealand, and don't earn a certain income to still qualify based on experience. So that's around the corner. But for what we have right now, we essentially have what you can hopefully see on screen, which is two tables, the bigger table on the left, my left, and then the smaller table for New Zealand experience on the right. So what that essentially is saying is that depending on how many points you can get, and now the points are based on either being registered in New Zealand for certain occupations, having a certain level of qualification, or earning a certain income in New Zealand. You can pick one of those three things. Depending on how many points you get from one of those three, you may need to top it up with work experience in New Zealand. So for some people, they'll be able to apply straight away for residence once they have the job offer. For other people, they will need to work their way towards residence. So a little bit like that green list idea, but instead of it being about occupations, it's more about the person's skill. So we do a couple of quick examples. So the doctor is a good example. Doctors are actually on the green list, so they would qualify there. But just if we assume they weren't on that list, on the points-based system, because their training to become registered would take at least 6 years, they will get 6 points for that. And the pass mark is actually 6 points. So basically, someone with, as a doctor, New Zealand registered with a job offer here would have the points they need straight away to apply for residence. They don't have to work in New Zealand for any period of time. And then the same would apply to someone with a PhD. That gives you 6 points on its own, and someone who's earning 3 times the median income. That's just a little bit over $200,000 New Zealand dollars a year. And then you go gradually down the list. So if you had a master's degree, for example, that will give you 5 points. So now you're 1 point away from the 6, and you will do 1 year of experience in New Zealand. That would get you to residence after that 1 year. And again, going down the list, the basic number or the bottom level is 3 points. So that might be for someone in a trade, say, for example, electrician. They can get 3. They can also get 4 points potentially, but 3 or 4 points, and then that would require either 3 or 2 years of experience. So essentially, the higher the level of skill you bring, the more points you get, the less New Zealand experience you need to achieve. The one big change that we will see when this is all reviewed, and I expect that to happen in the next probably 3 to 6 months, is that the idea of having to work 3 years at the upper level is probably going to go. The government's not overly happy with making people wait 3 years, and I don't think migrants are that happy about it either. So I think what we will see is the maximum amount of work experience that it will ever be required is 2 years. So that'll essentially make it a bit quicker for most people. So when you're looking at the points-based system, you need to first establish how many points you can get, either based on your ability to register here, the qualifications you might hold, or how much you might be able to earn. That will then give you an indication as to how much experience you need in New Zealand, and then you plot a way forward securing the job offer as well. So these are the two skilled migrant pathways that we have, one being based purely on the occupation and being in demand, the other based on having a certain number of points. And I guess the consultation process for us and that initial one-to-one discussion is to try and figure out where you might fit into one of these two categories. And then if you fit into one of those categories, how that might all work. But one of the things that's really important, and for most of you sitting offshore, is this job offer problem and securing the job offer. And that really is a whole discussion in and of itself. Because securing a job offer in New Zealand or securing a job offer anywhere is hard work. Securing it in another country when you're not physically here and you don't have the right to work is even more challenging. But there is a bit of a strategy that goes into that, and it's about thinking more cleverly about how to undertake that job search. It's about using all the tools that are available to you, but it's also about networking as well. A lot of applicants know people who've made the move. They've got friends here, they've got family. I speak to many clients who've got former colleagues who've made the move, and these are all really good connections to help you find that job. A lot of migrants who've made the move are more than happy to help their friends, colleagues, former colleagues, and family members to find that work. And New Zealand's a small country. So having those connections, being able to network, and also being able to do that job search really strategically is really important. And that's something we spend quite a bit of time on in our consultation as well. Not just we talk through the visa process and what's involved, but we will also talk through things like how does the job search work, what's the best way to find those jobs, what tools are available to people to do that. So that kind of brings me to the next slide, which is what is a successful migration? What does that actually look like? And I guess as we talked about earlier, it isn't just about the visa process. It goes well beyond that. And I think where some people go wrong in this process is assuming that, getting the visa will sort of solve everything. But actually, getting the visa is just a function or a part of a much, much bigger thing. So being prepared, making sure the family is prepared for the move, understanding that all of the different family members might experience this process differently. Something that I talk about with couples. So if there's a couple and maybe they have children, children generally tend to settle in really quickly. The older the children, the harder that is. But for most younger children, once they're in school, surrounded by new friends, it's very quick and easy process for them to assimilate. The person coming as the main applicant with a job offer, often, reasonably quick to assimilate because they've got new work colleagues, they're kind of doing things, they have their routine straight away. It's the other person in that equation, the partner, who may not have a job offer up front, who's sort of at home trying to figure things out where it can be quite isolating. So my advice is to the person who's not securing the job offer, as the partner maybe, to get out and about, do some volunteering, get some part-time work. The faster you kind of get yourself out there and meet people and do things, the sooner you'll settle in. It's about understanding that being prepared is really important. So if I had 4 sort of pieces of wisdom from my time doing this, being prepared is crucial from the start to the end. Understanding all the documentation you need, the steps that will follow, the timing of those, and also being prepared for change. That's actually the 4th bullet point there, which is part of being prepared. because the visa system does change. We've seen a lot of change in the last probably year or two, more than we've seen for a long time, but all very positive. The current government is opening up doors, introducing new visa categories, and kind of refining the policy for more skilled migrants to make the move, and for more investors and people with entrepreneurial skill as well. The policies do change. And so having someone on hand who can guide you through those changes is also really helpful. Enjoy it. I mean, it's a big move. It will be stressful. It will be nerve-wracking. There'll be lots of complications, but you've still got to make sure you try and enjoy the actual process. Kind of ride the waves, roll with the punches, and if you're flexible and you can adapt, you'll be absolutely fine. And then take the advice. I mean, if you engage someone like me to assist with the process and hold your hand through it, listen to what I'm telling you. My clients generally
No
really
problem.
good and they do that. But there are some clients who tend to, I guess, still rely on social media and the influence of other people out there. Look, our job is to make sure you know what you need to know, when you need to know it. And even if it is a tough conversation, we'll have that conversation with you. I often say to people, people like me at the start of the process, they love me at the end of the process, but in the middle, they might not like me quite so much. And that's purely because I've got to tell you what you need to know and keep you on track. Right. And then I guess finally, nobody can convince you to make this move, and that's very true. People will talk you through it. You'll have friends, you'll have family who will want to say, look, come to New Zealand, it's wonderful, it's amazing, you need to be here. But it's a decision that only you and your family can make. And you have to make it for the right reasons. You have to make it because it's the right opportunity for you. There's never a right time to do this. Often people say, well, when should I make the move? And my response to that is often as soon as the opportunity arises, because you might have a plan to start your new life in New Zealand in the new year. And that's often very common because people want their kids to start school in the new year. That makes perfect sense. But the reality is that you can't dictate that timing because the job offer might come around straight away and it might be the perfect opportunity to make the move sooner. I suggest focus less on the timing of it, but more on the success of it. And if if your plan is to move in January, but in September the perfect job comes along, you'd be mad not to take it. And often, in terms of the children and settling them in, they integrate middle of the year, end of the year, beginning of the year doesn't really make too much difference. And our schools are very well equipped for that as well. So it's all about, I guess, making the right decision for you, making sure you do the research, but don't overthink things as well. There's only so much research you can do until you actually live here and experience it for yourself. So you're never going to know absolutely everything, but it pays to know as much as you can. Have a plan, be prepared, enjoy the adventure, and obviously, take some advice and use some advice. It is a complex process. Immigration's website will make you think it's straightforward, click a button and away you go. There's a lot more to it. And if I can give you just one very quick example of how these sorts of things can change, and I guess how the simplest things can influence an outcome. I spoke to a client yesterday, lovely guy from South Africa, security specialist, well-paid job, accredited employer, almost the perfect applicant. He lodged his application on Tuesday of this week, in fact. No, sorry, Tuesday of last week. And the problem was that he had misread the fact that on Monday, the day before he lodged his application, the median wage for all applicants had increased ever so slightly. So he was about $1.80 short per hour of qualifying. He spent the government fee, which isn't cheap, to apply for residence for himself and his partner. It was picked up very quickly within a week, only for immigration to tell him, actually, you don't qualify because you missed it by a day. Now, it's little things like that where you've done all the planning and preparation, but no one's checked it before you filed it. You've rushed off, you've jumped online, you've clicked the button, and you've spent the money. Unfortunately, this guy application will be declined, but he does have an alternative pathway. So for him, it's actually just more of an expensive exercise than not actually being able to make it. All right, and so that's going to wrap things up for the actual seminar. We've done well on timing. Um, But I guess to wrap that up and to talk about what we do next, so today was to give you a kind of brief overview. The next step from here is a one-to-one discussion with me. We spend an hour to an hour and a half. I actually don't put a time limit on it. If it needs 2 hours, it is 2 hours. It's whatever it takes to explain the process to you. We go through your plans, we go through what it is you're looking to achieve, how are we going to do that. We assess your eligibility, of course, but what we tend to do is we do that very quickly up front. So we will send you a more detailed questionnaire before the meeting happens. I've already done the assessment, I've looked at your options, and I know exactly how this could work. We then go through that process, and then there's plenty of time left for you to ask questions and to explore all the different parts of the move, employment, education, healthcare, and so on. So our one-to-one sessions are not just about explaining the technical details, because reality is most people never remember them anyway. It's more about planning how this will all work and thinking about what you need to do in order to make that work, or to make that move work for you. I'll send an email out at the end of this event to everybody. If you're interested in booking, you just reply back, we work out a time, and off we go. All right, so in terms of questions, there's only a couple of questions, so we'll be able to get this done fairly quickly and everyone can get back to their evening. So if we work through these fairly quick, if you do have a question, just pop it into the chat now, and then I'll go through them. So first one I'll answer is, can you offer a job? No. So we're not recruiters, as I mentioned during the event. We're not recruitment agencies. We don't do job placements. What we do is we work really closely with clients on things like preparing their CV, showing them where and how to look for work, the kinds of things they need to think about when approaching employers. It's not just all about applying online, how New Zealand's networking community works and so forth. So we do offer a lot of support, and that's just part of the work we do. We don't charge separately for it. We don't have a specific program. There are some advisors out there who offer that sort of thing. In my experience, it's common sense. And that's what we're telling you. We're just giving you some common sense tools as to how to navigate the job market. The reality is you'll apply for jobs like everyone else, but being able to be in New Zealand for part of that process, if you can, is a major advantage. So we'll talk through that and how that process might work as well. Next question. Someone coming to New Zealand to study for a master's degree, to give 5 points, and then working as a warehouse manager. And will that then get them through the process? If you work, or if you secure a master's in New Zealand, that will give you a post-study work visa, which is an open visa that enables you to go off and find a job. Then if you secure a skilled job and work for 1 year, not two, just one, that will give you the 6 points. One thing I do say to people, though, in terms of coming to study here and then looking for work, that's okay and tends to work if you're staying in your lane, if you're following your existing career. But if you're taking a sort of sudden dramatic change in career options or skill, coming to study something very different and then looking for work at the end of that, that may not work out so well. And the simple reason that doesn't is because you have to secure a skilled job at the end of the process. And if you don't have any previous experience, but you just have the qualification, securing that skilled job might actually be quite tough. So if studying in New Zealand is a pathway you want to pursue, don't do it because it might be a shortcut to that work visa. Do it because you actually do want to study here. It's an expensive exercise, and you still need the job offer at the end of it anyway. So you kind of have to think, well, if I do this course, is it going to make me more employable or less employable? And if it's a master's adding to an original bachelor's and some experience, that might work quite well. But if it's a new master's for something different, maybe not so much. In terms of the next question, if an employer hired me, how long does the visa process usually take? That's a really good question. Um, so the work visa process will take generally 4 to 5 weeks when you file the work visa. The employer has to go through some steps before that and to become accredited and to secure an approval to apply for that work visa. But assuming they've done that, then 4 to 5 weeks, which is actually pretty reasonable. And for most employers who would be contemplating hiring a local applicant who would need to give 4 weeks notice anyway, and maybe want a week or two off in between, then 4 weeks for a visa or 5 weeks for a visa is actually about the same. Residence will take a little bit longer depending on if you're straight to residence, green list, or points, but not bad in terms of overall timing. Some countries it can take years to get residence processed. In New Zealand, it's normally going to be done within a few weeks to a couple of months. I filed recently a points-based application for someone, master's degree in New Zealand, working for a year. It was allocated about 4 days after I submitted it, and it was processed inside of 3 weeks. So timing at the moment is fairly quick. Um, Average cost of a move, and is it common for employers to offer relocation? Another good question. So you are all giving me some good questions this today, which is great. So in terms of costs of a move, that does vary from person to person, depending on how many applicants are involved. So is it whole family or one person? Is it applying straight to residence, or is it working and then applying for residence? But what I would say is it's not cheap, but it's not horrendously expensive either. So if I factor in things like visa costs, cost for my services, again, they vary depending on what we're doing, flights, a bit of settlement money. So setting yourself up in New Zealand, buying all those things you'll need when you're first here, sort of getting yourself grounded and then to a point where you're now earning an income and not having to pay for things out of your savings. I would estimate for a family of four between 40 and 50,000 New Zealand dollars total spread over the whole process, and that can be a year or two or three. So it's not an upfront cost. These things are never done as one payment. It's all the little costs and bits and pieces in between. When we do a consultation with people, we do give them a plan and a budget. And so we try and sort of break it all down and give them a realistic outlook on what it will cost. And in reality, you have to factor that in, because if you don't have the finances to make this move, it will never work. So we want to make sure people have the financial backing to do it, but you don't have to be incredibly wealthy to make this move. And often a lot of the cost, excuse me, talking for an hour can take a toll. A lot of the costs can be sort of subsidized, I guess, or supported by the income you're earning in New Zealand. So bear in mind that you're not paying for everything up front. The cost of effectively spread out. In terms of, is it common for employers to offer compensation? Not that common. Some employers will, depending on the level of skill and the salary on offer. If you're highly skilled or more senior level, then there might be a relocation grant or compensation payment. But for most applicants, I'd say probably more than 90%, it's all on them. The employer is responsible for paying some costs towards the process, which you can't pay. But in terms of things like residence visas, work visas, your flights, all that sort of thing, that's generally your expense. All right, we'll do a couple more. So, where do you apply for a work registration offshore? I'm not quite sure what that means, but if you're applying for registration, that's done through each independent registration body. And if you're talking about applying for jobs, then there are all manner of websites available. But it's not just about the websites. That's one way of doing it, but that's kind of a reactive approach. I often say to people, just go and find the companies that do what you do and who you think would be good options for you, and approach them. Even if they're not advertising jobs, still approach them. And there's a hidden job market in New Zealand where employers are potentially looking for people but not advertising. And you're never going to know those jobs exist unless you just approach the employer directly. Um, if I have work experience and skills, but I don't have supporting certificates, can this still be considered for the visa? So if you have work experience and skill, there is still ways to make this work, but you do need to be able to prove that experience or skill. So if you've got work experience, great, but we have to actually be able to document that. Immigration is all about evidence. If you say you can do something, that's great, but you have to be able to prove you can do it. So you don't have to have a degree or a qualification to make this move, but you do have to have a certain level of skill and ultimately be able to find the right job. Right. If you are on one visa and you want to apply for another visa, does immigration allow you to finish the previous visa before transferring me on to the next if you want? Generally, no. So the way that works is if you're on one particular visa and you apply for a different type of visa, when that second type of visa is approved, it takes over. So even if the first visa was still valid for another 6 months, but your new visa was approved today, the new visa now kicks in, the old visa disappears. So whatever you were allowed to do on that first one disappears and the new one takes over. So timing your applications is reasonably important. Providing evidence of a stable relationship you have to live together. What happens if your job doesn't allow for that? Um, that's a good question. It's a tricky question. So immigration has definitions of what they consider to be living together. They have definitions for everything, but there are always ways to present a situation that doesn't quite meet that definition. So if a couple are living together, but maybe for employment reasons or other reasons, they're living in different places, but they spend a lot of time together, they still share their expenses, their costs, their commitments, they've been together for a while, then that's a picture that can be presented to immigration. It's sort of each case on its own merits is how immigration would describe it. It's a case by case situation, but often, we come across situations that are a little bit different. They don't fit exactly within the way the rules are written, and they can be managed and navigated through the process. And then final question before we wrap it up, and I head off to get my second morning coffee. During the 2-year waiting period or work experience period in New Zealand, I would assume, are you allowed to leave the country for short trips? Yes, absolutely. So when you're working here on a work visa, you're entitled to travel in and out. Most temporary visas are granted multiple entry. And obviously, as long as your employer is happy for you to take leave, you're free to come and go. Moving here on a temporary visa isn't a prison sentence. You are absolutely able to travel. And then once you have residence, you can also travel as well. All right, thank you all very much. I hope that has been useful and has given you some food for thought. I am going to wrap it up now. I'll be emailing everybody to let you know about the consultation process. And if anyone is interested in attending another seminar, we'll be having another event in September as well. We also offer a visa Q&A session on Friday afternoons, 3 o'clock New Zealand time. That might be a little bit tricky for some of you, but you are welcome to register for that. Details are available on our website, and that is literally an hour where I answer people's questions, tricky questions that they might have. But thank you all very much, and I hope you enjoy your evening or afternoon, no matter where you are. And I'm heading off to grab that cup of coffee. All right, take care. Thank you.